When I decided to surprise my husband, George, at his office, I never imagined what I would find. Upon arriving, the security guard stopped me and said, confused, "Hold on, you're definitely not Mr. Thompson's wife. I see her every day." Before I could answer, I saw a younger woman stepping out of the elevator. The guard greeted her with a nod. "See you tomorrow, ma'am, same time." "As always, right?" My heart raced. I was in shock when I saw who it was. But before I continue, check if you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. It was an ordinary October day. When my life turned upside down, I had woken up early, made coffee for George, as I had done for the last 4 decades, and watched him leave for work in his impeccable navy suit. After so much time together, our routine was like a calm river, predictable with no major surprises, or so I thought. That morning, while tidying our bedroom, I found a crumpled card in the pocket of the jacket George had worn the day before. It was for the 40th anniversary of the company where he worked. I smiled, thinking of how I could surprise him. It had been a while since I had visited his office. The idea came naturally. I would bring him his favorite treats from the local bakery and show up unannounced. Our marriage had been a bit lukewarm lately, with George coming home later and later, always tired. Perhaps a romantic gesture was exactly what we needed to rekindle the flame that seemed to be fading. I spent the rest of the morning getting ready with care. I put on my best floral dress, the one George always said brought out my eyes. I gathered my gray hair into an elegant bun and even put on red lipstick, something I rarely did in recent years. The bakery was just a few blocks from our house. I bought a box of the dark chocolate truffles that George loved so much. The clerk wrapped them in elegant paper with a gold ribbon. Perfect, I thought, imagining the surprised look on my husband's face. The company's building was imposing, all glass and concrete, located in the downtown business district of Chicago. George had worked there for over 30 years, starting as a simple assistant and working his way up to a senior director position. I was very proud of his career, of his dedication. He always said that everything he did was for us, for our family, for our future. When I arrived at the building, my heart was pounding with the anticipation of the surprise. I entered the main lobby and headed to the reception desk. A middle-aged security guard with the name Smith on his ID tag was at the counter. "Good morning, I'd like to see my husband, George Thompson. He's the director of the finance department." The guard looked me up and down with a curious expression. "Do you have any identification, ma'am?" I found it strange. I had been there other times, though not recently. Maybe it was a new procedure. I took my driver's license out of my purse and handed it to him. "Eleanor Thompson," he read aloud, then faced me with narrowed eyes. "You said you're Mr. Thompson's wife?" "Yes, we've been married for 40 years, I replied, starting to feel uncomfortable with his tone. "That's impossible," he said, shaking his head. "I know Mr. Thompson's wife. She comes here almost every day." I thought it must be some kind of mix-up. Maybe he was thinking of someone else, another Thompson. There must be some mistake. "George Thompson, CFO, 62 years old," I insisted, my voice now betraying my uncertainty. The guard pointed towards the elevator bank. "Wait, you can see for yourself. Look, here comes Mrs. Thompson now." I turned in the indicated direction and saw an elegant woman exiting the elevator. She must have been about 45, with perfectly styled brown hair, wearing a navy blue executive dress very similar to the color of George's suits. She walked with confidence as if she belonged there. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," she said as she passed the reception desk. "I'm heading out for lunch. Please let George know I'll be back at 2. "Certainly, Mrs. Thompson. Have a nice lunch," the guard replied with familiarity. I stood frozen, unable to move as she walked past me without even noticing me. The box of truffles almost slipped from my trembling hands. When I finally managed to find my voice, she had already left the building. Who is that woman? I asked, my voice choked. That's Claire Thompson, the CFO's wife, he answered, now looking at me with a mixture of confusion and pity. Are you sure we're talking about the same person? My mind was trying to process what was happening. How could there be two Mrs. Thompsons? Was this some kind of terrible mistake, or was my world about to collapse? I need to see him, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm very sorry, but without prior authorization, I can't let you go up, the guard said. Now visibly uncomfortable with the situation, at that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't leave without finding out the truth. I understand, I said, trying to regain my composure. Actually, I came for an interview in the Human Resources Department. Could you tell me where that is? The guard seemed relieved to change the subject and pointed me towards the third floor. I thanked him and headed for the elevator, but as soon as the doors closed, I pressed the button for the 8th floor where the executive offices were. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. 4 decades of marriage, 2 children raised together, a whole life shared. How is it possible that there was another woman introducing herself as George's wife? What else could he be hiding from me? The elevator reached the 8th floor and the doors opened to a quiet, elegant hallway. I knew where George's office was. I had been there a few times for holiday parties and company celebrations. I walked slowly, trying not to make noise with my shoes on the marble floor. When I reached the door with a gold plaque bearing the name George Thompson, Chief Financial Officer, I stopped. Through the frosted glass, I could see his silhouette sitting at his desk, apparently focused on some document. I was about to turn the handle when I heard voices approaching. I quickly hid behind a large potted plant in the hallway. Is George in his office? Asked a man I recognized as Charles, one of George's oldest colleagues at the company. Yes, but I think he's busy right now, the secretary replied. It's quick. I just need him to sign these documents before his lunch with Claire. My whole body tensed at the sound of that name. Charles entered the office without knocking. From where I was, I could hear snippets of the conversation. Lunch with Claire. George's voice sounded both familiar and strange at the same time. Yes, she just left. Said she'd meet you at the usual restaurant. My vision blurred, tears welling up in my eyes. Almost 4 decades of marriage, 2 children raised together, now adults with their own families, a house built with mutual sacrifice, thousands of dinners cooked, clothes washed, birthdays celebrated, and all this time, there had been another woman. I couldn't hold back. I stepped out from my hiding place and walked into the office without knocking. George and Charles turned towards me, surprised. The expression on my husband's face changed from surprise to horror in a matter of seconds. Eleanor, he said, jumping up from his chair as if he'd been electrocuted. What are you doing here? The box of truffles fell from my trembling hands, scattering chocolates across the floor. Who is Claire Thompson? George, I asked, my voice firmer than I expected. Charles looked from George to me, clearly uncomfortable. I think you two need to talk, he muttered quickly, leaving the office and closing the door. Behind him, we stood there facing each other, husband and wife, like strangers. I barely recognized the man in front of me, not because he had changed physically, but because I realized I might have never truly known him. I was going to tell you, he began, his voice almost pleading. Eleanor, please sit down. It's not what you're thinking. And what am I thinking, George? I asked, remaining standing. That my husband has another wife. That he's living a double life. That every night he spent working late for the past few years was a lie. He ran his hands through his grey hair. A gesture I knew so well after so many years together. It was what he did. When he was nervous, when he felt cornered, Clara and I, it's complicated, he finally said. Complicated, I repeated, feeling the anger welling up inside me. Complicated is finding out your husband has another family after 40 years of marriage. George came around the desk and tried to approach me, but I stepped back. Don't touch me, I said, my voice trembling. Just tell me the truth. I want to hear it from you, he said deeply, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an immense weight. I met Claire 15 years ago on a business trip to Miami, he began. It was a relationship that shouldn't have happened, but it did. By the time I realized it, I was too involved to just end it. And when exactly were you planning on telling me? I asked, feeling each word like a knife cutting my throat. I tried many times, Eleanor, but how do you tell the woman you built a life with that you made the biggest mistake a man can make? How do you destroy our family? Our children, our grandchildren? So, your solution was to live 2 lives for 15 years. His silence was answer enough. I felt dizzy as if the world was spinning around me. I had to hold on to the edge of the desk to keep from falling. Children, do you have children with her? I asked, dreading the answer. George looked down. A daughter, she's 14. The blow was devastating. A daughter the age of our grandchildren, a whole family built in parallel to ours. How could you hide this for so long? I asked more to myself than to him. The business trips, the nights out, the busy weekends. Eleanor, please. He tried to approach again. Let's go home. We can talk. I can explain everything. Explain. There's no explanation for this, George. There's no justification for 15 years of lies. Just then, the door opened and she walked in. Clara Thompson, my husband's other wife. She stopped upon seeing us, her expression shifting from surprise to recognition. You must be Eleanor, she said simply. What shocked me most was not her beauty or her youth. It was the absence of guilt or shame in her voice. She knew about me all this time. She knew it was too much for me. Without another word, I grabbed my purse and walked out of the office, passing Claire as if she were just another piece of furniture. I heard George shout my name as I hurried down the hall, but I didn't look back. In the elevator alone, I finally let the tears fall. They weren't tears of sadness, I realize now, but of rage. Rage for being deceived, for believing in a man who lived a life for so long, for dedicating my life to someone who didn't even deserve my consideration. When I left the building, the autumn sun momentarily blinded me. The world outside continued as usual, but I was irrevocably changed. The woman who had entered that building with a box of chocolates and dreams of rekindling a marriage no longer existed. In her place was a 6-year-old woman who had just discovered that her entire life had been built on an illusion, and now she needed to decide what to do with the pieces. The journey home was the longest of my life. I didn't take a cab or a bus. I just walked aimlessly, trying to process what had happened. The city streets I knew so well seemed strange now, as if I were in a completely different place. People passed by me, living their normal lives, chatting, laughing, rushing to appointments. How could they carry on when my world had just collapsed? How could the sun keep shining? I ended up sitting on a park bench watching children play on the playground. I thought of my own children, now adults, with their own families. I thought of the daughter George had with Claire, a teenager who probably knew me only as the other woman, if she knew of my existence at all. The irony of it made me let out a bitter laugh that startled a lady sitting on the next bench. My cell phone rang several times. It was George, of course. I turned the device off and shoved it into the bottom of my purse. What could he possibly say now that would change anything? What magic words would explain 15 years of betrayal? When I finally decided to go back to our home, it was already getting dark. I opened the door and entered the apartment where we had lived for over 30 years. Every corner of that place held memories. The sofa where we watched movies together on Friday nights, the kitchen table where our children did their homework, the wall with family photos that chronicled our lives together. Was any of it real? Had any part of it been true? I went to the bedroom and opened George's closet. His suits perfectly aligned, his ties organized by color, his shirts ironed. With a sudden movement, I tore everything off the hangers and threw it on the floor. I opened drawers and scattered their contents across the bed. What was I looking for exactly? More proof of his betrayal, or perhaps a magical explanation that would turn it all into a terrible misunderstanding. It was then that I found it at the bottom of a sock drawer, a small wooden box. Locked. I had never seen it before. I searched for a key, but couldn't find one. In a fit of rage, I grabbed a letter opener from the nightstand and forced the lock until it gave way. Inside were documents, a lease for an apartment on the other side of the city, bank statements from an account I knew nothing about, and photos, lots of photos. George with Claire, George with a little girl who grew older in each picture, his other daughter George on beaches, in restaurants, at birthday parties, a whole life documented in pictures, a parallel life to the one we lived together. I sat on the floor amidst the mess I had created and cried. I don't know how long I was there, but when I lifted my head, it was late at night and I heard the front door open. George was home. Eleanor, he called, his voice echoing through the apartment. Are you here? I didn't answer. I heard his footsteps approaching the bedroom, hesitant, when he opened the door and saw me there, sitting on the floor. Amidst his scattered clothes with the open box and photos around me, his face went pale. So, this is it? I said, my voice surprisingly calm. This is your real life, Eleanor. I can't explain. No, I interrupted, getting up with difficulty. My knees ached. How long had I been sitting there? There is no explanation. There is only the truth, George, and the truth is that you built an entire life separate from me, while I was taking care of our home, raising our children, growing old, waiting for you. Every night, you were with her, building a family, having another daughter. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking very old and tired. Then how was it supposed to happen? I asked, were you planning on telling me someday? Or were you hoping I'd never find out? That I would die without knowing my husband was living a lie? I wanted to tell you, he insisted, so many times I was on the verge of saying everything, but then I'd think about how it would destroy you, how it would affect our children, our grandchildren. No, I cut him off. Don't use our family as an excuse. You didn't think about us when you started that other life. You only thought about yourself. George hung his head in defeat. What are you going to do now? He finally asked. It was a good question. What would I do at 60 years old after dedicating my entire life to this man, to this marriage? What was left for me? I want you to leave, I said, the words coming out as if from someone else. Now, Eleanor, please, let's talk. I can't explain everything. We can work this out, work this out. I repeated incredulously. Do you think there's anything to work out here? You have another wife, George, another family, a teenage daughter. There's no resolution for this. Claire isn't my wife, he said quickly. Not legally. We never got married. That was supposed to make me feel better that he hadn't officially married her. Just leave the sham. Leave, I repeated, pointing to the door. Go to your other apartment, to your other family. I don't want to see you right now. George looked like he wanted to say something more, but he changed his mind. He picked up a few items of clothing from the floor, put them in a small suitcase, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I never wanted to hurt you. I almost laughed. He never wanted to hurt me, but he lived a life for 15 years. I didn't answer and he finally left, closing the door behind him. As soon as I was alone, the enormity of what had happened hit me with full force. My marriage was over. Not only that, maybe it had never been real, at least not for the last 15 years. I picked up my cell phone and called my daughter, and she answered on the third ring. Mom, are you okay? It's late. I wanted to tell her everything, to vent, to cry with her, but the words wouldn't come. How do you tell your daughter her father has another family? How do you destroy the image she has of him? Everything's fine, I lied. I just wanted to hear your voice. Something happened, she said, always perceptive. Is it that? No, dear, everything's fine, really. We'll talk tomorrow, okay? After hanging up, I stared at the phone. I would have to tell my children eventually. They had a right to know, but not today. I couldn't go through that today. I took a long hot bath, trying to wash away all the pain and confusion. I lay down in our bed and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind was filled with images of George with Claire, George with his other daughter, George living his other life. While I, oblivious, waited at home, the next morning, I woke up after a brief, restless sleep and realized I needed to make decisions. First, I called a locksmith and had all the locks on the apartment changed. Next, I called my lawyer, a woman I had known for years from our book club. Marissa, I need your professional help, I said when she answered. I want to file for divorce. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Eleanor, are you sure what happened? I'm sure, I replied firmly. Can I tell you the details in person? We set a meeting for that afternoon at her office. Then I did something I had been putting off. I called my children and asked them to come to the apartment that evening. I had to tell them in person. The day passed in a hazy dream. I tidied the bedroom, putting away George's clothes that I had scattered the night before. I separated the photos I had found and put them in an envelope. They would be evidence for the divorce, but I didn't want my children to see them. At the meeting with Marissa, I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, making occasional notes. It's a clear case of abandonment and adultery, she said when I finished. You're entitled to half of everything, including his pension, and considering the circumstances, we can request alimony, money. It was so strange to think about that now. Throughout our married life, George had handled the finances. I had my own salary as a teacher, not my small pension, but he always managed the larger sums, the investments, the future. I just want what's fair, I said, and I wanted to be quick. When I left Marissa's office, I felt strangely lighter. Making a decision, taking action, gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since I walked into that office building the day before. That evening, Anne and Luke, my two children, arrived at almost the same time. They both looked worried. Mom, what's going on? Anne asked as soon as they came in. We tried calling Dad all day, but he's not answering, and you sounded strange on the phone. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the sofa. I have something to tell you. And then I told them, not all the details. I didn't show them the photos, but I told them the essentials. Their father had another family for 15 years, another woman, a teenage daughter, an apartment on the other side of the city. Their faces went from disbelief to shock and finally to rage. Luke, always more explosive, stood up and started pacing the living room. I'm going to kill him, he said, his voice trembling. How could he do this to you, Mom? Anne was crying silently, holding my hand. I can't believe it. Dad was always so present, so family-oriented. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Present, he always worked late, traveled constantly, spent weekends solving company problems. Luke stopped pacing and looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. It's true, how did we not notice this? How did we not see the signs? Because he was careful, I replied, and because none of us wanted to see. We talked late into the night. They wanted to know everything. When did it start? How did I find out? Who was this woman? I told them what I knew, what I had seen. What are you going to do now, Mom? And finally asked, I'm going to move on, I replied, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. And us? Luke asked, how should we deal with him? It was a difficult question. As furious as I was, George was still their father. I didn't want to stand between them and their relationship with him. That's between you and him, I answered honestly. He made terrible mistakes as a husband, but that doesn't erase the years he spent as a father. You need to decide for yourselves how you want to handle this. When they finally left with promises to return the next day, I was alone again in the quiet apartment. But this time, the silence didn't feel so oppressive. There was a strange peace in the truth, even a painful one. Lying in bed, I thought about how my life had completely changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, I was a devoted wife living what I believed to be a long, if perhaps a little lukewarm marriage. Today I was a betrayed woman about to get a divorce at 60. What awaited me now? For the first time since leaving that office building, I allowed myself to think about the future, not just the next few days or weeks, but the years to come. I would have to learn to live alone, to make my own decisions, to rebuild my identity. Beyond being George's wife, it was terrifying, but I also realized with surprise it was a little exciting. The next morning, I woke up to my cell phone ringing. It was George again. This time, I answered, "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. "We need to talk," he said, sounding exhausted. "There are things you need to know, explanations you deserve. I've seen enough in the photos, George. There's nothing to explain. Please," he begged. "Coffee, a public place. Just give me that chance." I thought about refusing, about hanging up, but maybe there were questions only he could answer, questions that would haunt me for the rest of my life if I didn't get answers. "Nah, I finally agreed. At the bookstore cafe at 11, he seemed relieved. "I'll be there, thank you, Eleanor." I hung up without replying and stared at the ceiling. Was I doing the right thing? Maybe, but not for him. For me, I needed to understand how all of this had happened right under my nose. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant dress and a pair of earrings I had bought for myself on my 60th birthday. I put my hair up and applied a light lipstick. I didn't want to look defeated. The cafe was a few blocks from my house. When I arrived, George was already there, sitting at a table in the corner. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a day. His eyes were marked by deep dark circles and he hadn't shaved. I sat across from him without saying a word. "Thank you for coming," he began. "I didn't come for you," I cut him off. "I came because I need to understand how you could do this." He nodded slowly. "That's fair. And I'm going to tell you everything without lies this time." For the next hour, George talked. He told me how he met Claire on a business trip to Miami 15 years ago. She was an executive assistant to one of the directors he was negotiating a merger with. He talked about how the relationship started as something casual that should have ended when he came home, but I didn't end it, he said, his eyes fixed on the coffee cup in front of him. We kept talking and when I went back to Miami 3 months later, we met again, and so it began. I murmured, feeling a dull ache in my chest. Yes, at first it was just physical, an affair, something I knew was wrong but couldn't stop. Then she told me she was pregnant. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to control the wave of rage and betrayal that washed over me. I panicked. George continued. "I thought about telling you everything, asking for forgiveness, taking responsibility for the child, but continuing our marriage, but I didn't have the courage. so Claire suggested a solution. She wouldn't ask for anything from me. She would raise the child alone if I helped her financially. How convenient, I said, my voice laced with bitterness. At first, that's how it was. I sent money, visited occasionally, but when Lucy was born, his voice choked. When I saw her for the first time, something changed. She was my daughter, Eleanor. I couldn't just walk away. So, you decided to have two families. I completed. It wasn't a conscious decision. It just happened gradually. A visit here, a weekend there. Claire got a job in Houston with the same company. The situation just evolved. For 15 years, I observed. And at no point in those 15 years did you think I deserved to know the truth. George finally lifted his eyes and met mine. Many times, especially when the kids left home and it was just the two of us. But then I think, why destroy what we have? Why cause you that pain? It was selfish of me. I know that now. Selfish, I repeated. That's an interesting word to describe what you did. We were silent for a moment. A young waitress came over to ask if we wanted more coffee. George nodded yes. I shook my head no. How did you manage to hide it for so long? I asked when she walked away. All those trips, late nights at the office. In the beginning, they really were work trips, just that Claire would join me. When she moved to Houston, I rented the apartment for them, and over time, it just became easier to lie, one lie led to another. And at the office, did everyone know? George looked away, and I realized I had hit a nerve. A few close colleagues, yes, Charles, obviously, and a few other directors. I asked everyone for discretion, and they kept your dirty little secret for years, I said with contempt, while I was the idiot who knew nothing. That's not how they saw it, Eleanor, that's not how I saw it. And how did you see it, George? How did you see me? He looked genuinely disturbed. Now, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted the cup to his lips. I loved you, Eleanor, I still love you. You are the mother of my children, my partner of decades. What I had with Claire was different. Oh, of course, the exciting affair with the younger woman versus the comfort of the old wife at home, I said, unable to contain my sarcasm. It's not that. With you, I had history, roots, memories. With Claire, at first it was just excitement, something new. Then Lucy came and everything got complicated. I found myself trapped between two worlds, unable to abandon either of them. Lucy, my mind fixated on that name, George's daughter, whom I had never met, who probably didn't even know I existed, and the girl, does she know about me? George hesitated. She knows I'm married, yes, but she doesn't know the details. Claire thought it was better that way. Claire thought it was better, I repeated. And you always did what Claire thought was best, didn't you? Eleanor, no, I interrupted, holding up my hand. Enough, I've heard enough. I filed for divorce yesterday. My lawyer will be in touch with you. George paused. Divorce? But Eleanor, we can work this out. I know I messed up. I messed up terribly. But we have 40 years together. We don't just throw that away. We don't. George, you threw it away when you decided to have two families. When you lied to me every day for 15 years. I stood up, grabbing my purse. This isn't the 1950 seconds when women stayed with unfaithful husbands because they had no choice. I'm 60 years old, yes, but I still have a life ahead of me, and I'm not going to waste it on someone who betrayed me this way. George stood up, too, trying to grab my arm, but I pulled away. Eleanor, please let's talk more. I can change. I can fix this. There's nothing to fix, I replied surprisingly. Come, it's over, George. I walked out of the cafe without looking back, feeling a mixture of pain and liberation. As I walked back home, I realized that for the first time since I discovered the truth, I was breathing normally, as if a weight had been partially lifted from my chest. What George had said didn't justify his actions, nothing could, but at least now I knew the truth, as painful as it was better than the doubt. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in a new routine. I started dealing with the practical aspects of the separation. I opened a new bank account to receive my pension, which used to go into our joint account. I asked Anne for help to better understand our finances. She worked as an accountant and knew much more about these things than I did. George tried to call me several times, but I only answered when it was about practical matters, documents he needed to retrieve from the apartment, things he had left behind. A week after our conversation at the cafe, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. Eleanor Thompson, a female voice asked when I answered. Yes, who is this? It's Claire Peterson. We need to talk. My heart skipped a beat. The other woman, the other wife. For a moment, I thought about hanging up, but curiosity was stronger. About what? I think you know. Please, it's important. Can we meet? I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to see her, didn't want to give her any satisfaction, but another part needed to look her in the eye to understand who this woman was, who had shared my husband with me for so many years. Oh, right, I finally agreed, where we agreed to meet at a small cafe in downtown Chicago, far from both my apartment and George's office, neutral territory. I arrived 15 minutes early on purpose. I wanted to be there first to establish my presence. I chose a table in the back with my back to the wall where I could see the door. Claire arrived promptly. I recognized her immediately, though she was dressed more casually than the day I saw her at the office. She hesitated at the entrance, looking around until our eyes met. She walked to my table with a confidence I found irritating. Eleanor, she said, sitting across from me, thank you for coming. Let's get straight to the point. I replied dryly. What do you want? She nodded, seeming to appreciate my directness. I want to clarify a few things. First, you should know that George never told me he would leave you. I never promised him that, and he never promised me that, and that's supposed to make me feel better. No, she answered, surprising me with her honesty. I just want you to understand the situation as it is, not as it might seem. And how is it in your opinion? Complicated, she said. When I met George, he told me he was married. I was just getting out of a difficult relationship. I didn't want anything serious. It was supposed to be a fling, but it wasn't. No. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought about disappearing, raising the child alone, without involving George, but that wouldn't have been fair to him or the baby, and was it fair to me? I asked, my voice betraying the emotion I was trying to control. Was it fair to keep me in the dark for 15 years? Claire had the decency to look ashamed. No, and for that I feel guilty every day. But the situation evolved gradually. In the beginning, George only visited us occasionally, sent money. Then when I came to work in Houston, it got complicated. Lucy wanted to see her father more often. She loves him. Eleanor, I took a deep breath. The mention of her daughter, of their daughter, was still painful. Why are we having this conversation, Claire? What do you hope to achieve? She looked me straight in the eye. I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you or destroy your marriage, and I want you to understand that Lucy is an innocent teenager in this situation. Whatever happens between you, George, and me, she is not to blame. I would never blame a child for the mistakes of her parents, I replied, offended that she could think that of me. But that doesn't change the fact that you and George betrayed me for 15 years. You're right, she agreed to my surprise. We are not the same. You are the legitimate wife, the woman with whom he built a life first. I am the other woman. I was always the other woman, Eleanor, no matter how much I tried to pretend otherwise. There was an unexpected vulnerability in her voice. That momentarily disarmed me. What do you want now? I asked. George and I are getting a divorce. He'll be free to be with you officially if that's what you both want. I don't know what I want, she admitted. For years, I lived in this strange arrangement, convincing myself that it was okay, that it was normal to share the man I loved with another woman. Now that everything is out in the open, I don't know if I can continue. That's ironic, I observed. Now that he could be all yours, you're not sure you want him. The truth is complicated, she said with a sad smile. Maybe I fell in love not just with George, but with the situation, the drama, the secrecy. Now that that's over, I couldn't help but feel a pain of sympathy for her despite everything. What kind of life was that? To be eternally the second choice. And Lucy? I asked. How is she dealing with all this? It's been hard for her. George was always a present father within the limitations of our situation. Now she's confused, afraid of losing him. She won't lose him, I stated, surprised by my own certainty. George is not a good husband, clearly, but he was always a dedicated father to my children. I don't think he'll be any different with her. Claire seemed genuinely grateful for my words. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. We were silent for a moment, two women united by a man who had betrayed us in different ways. What are you going to do now? Claire finally asked. Move on, I replied. I'm 60 years old. It's not the end of life, although for a moment it felt like it. I had my pension, my children, my grandchildren. I have friends I haven't seen in years. Because I was always busy being the perfect wife, maybe it's time to rediscover who I am beyond Eleanor. George's wife, you seem stronger than I expected, she commented. I'm stronger than I expected myself. I admitted the pain hasn't gone away. I doubt it ever will completely, but I'm not going to let it define the rest of my life. When we said goodbye, we were not friends. We never could be. But there was a mutual understanding, two women who had been deceived in different ways by the same man. Walking home after our meeting, I realized I was breathing more freely than I had in weeks. The conversation with Claire had given me something unexpected, perspective. I was not the only victim. In this story, there was a woman who had lived in the shadow of my marriage for 15 years and a girl who only knew her father through stolen visits. In a way, we all lost. The following months were an emotional roller coaster. The divorce proceedings moved forward with George constantly trying to convince me to give up. He would show up at the apartment with flowers, gifts, promises of change. At one particularly pathetic moment, he even suggested that we could keep things as they were since I now knew the truth. How can you think I would agree to stay married to you knowing you have another family? I asked incredulously. Many couples have arrangements, he replied, not looking me in the eye. This is not an arrangement, George, it's a betrayal, and I deserve more than that. My children were furious with their father. Luke refused to even answer his calls, while I maintained contact only out of obligation. The revelation of Lucy's existence, a half-sister they never knew, was especially painful for both of them. How could he hide this from us? Anne asked one day, crying in my lap like when she was a child. We have a 4-year-old sister we've never met. Your father made many mistakes, I replied, stroking her hair, but that girl is innocent. One day when you're ready, maybe you'll want to meet her. Do you really think so? Asked Luke, who was sitting on the other side of the room after everything he's done. Yes, I answered honestly. She's your blood, and she's not to blame for the choices the adults around her made. They pondered my words, and I saw in their eyes a mixture of anger, confusion, and perhaps a hint of curiosity. In the midst of all this emotional chaos, something unexpected began to happen. I rediscovered parts of myself that I had forgotten. I started painting again, a hobby I had abandoned. When the children were born, I enrolled in a photography course I had always wanted to take. I reconnected with old friends. I started attending a book club. Every small discovery, every new activity was like reclaiming a piece of me that had been lost over the years, not because George had forbidden me to do those things he never did, but because somehow I had reduced myself to the role of wife, mother, grandmother. I had forgotten that I was also Eleanor, a woman with her own desires, ambitions, and interests. 6 months after that fateful visit to George's office, the divorce was finalized. The division of assets was surprisingly simple. George didn't contest anything, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of exhaustion. I received half of everything, including the apartment where we lived. He kept the lake house that we rarely used. The day I signed the final papers, my lawyer congratulated me. "You're going to be fine, Eleanor," she said, squeezing my hand. "Financially, everything is settled, and emotionally, well, that comes with time. I'm already better than I expected," I confessed. "Every day is a little easier." That night, when I got home, my house, now solely mine, there was a large bouquet of flowers at the door. My first thought was that it was from George, another desperate attempt at reconciliation. But the card read, "To the strongest woman we know, with love, Anne, Luke, Maria, John, and Peter, my children and grandchildren, my real family." I went into the apartment, put the flowers in a vase, and poured myself a glass of wine. Sitting on the balcony, looking at the city lights, I reflected on the incredible journey of the past few months. At 60, I had discovered a devastating betrayal, faced the end of my 4-decade marriage, and been forced to rebuild my life from scratch. It would have been easy to fall apart, to allow myself to be consumed by bitterness and resentment. Instead, I was discovering a new version of myself, an Eleanor who didn't need a man's approval or love to define herself, a woman who could be alone without feeling lonely. The future was still uncertain. There would be difficult days ahead. Days when the pain of betrayal would return with full force. Days when I would miss the life I had or thought I had. But there were also endless possibilities, the opportunity to discover who I really was, to live on my own terms, to create new memories. Untainted by lies, my cell phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Anne. "Did you like the flowers?" she asked when I answered. "They're beautiful, dear. Thank you, Mom. We're all here at Luke's house. We're celebrating Peter's 6th birthday. Do you want to come over? We can send an Uber to pick you up." I hesitated for only a second. "Of course, give me half an hour to get ready." I hung up the phone with a smile. This was my life now, imperfect, unexpected, but mine, and for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely excited to see what would come next. A year passed. Since that fateful day, I discovered George's double life, a year of pain, discoveries, tears, and surprisingly, laughter. Today at 61, I am a different woman from the one who walked into that office building with a box of truffles, hoping to surprise her husband. That naive Eleanor was left behind, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and unexpectedly happier. The changes started small. First, I redecorated the apartment, removing the vestiges of George. Paintings he had chosen were replaced with works I adored. The brown sofa, he insisted, matched everything, gave way to a comfortable set in shades of blue. I transformed his office into a painting studio where I spent hours lost in colors and textures. My children adapted to the new reality over time. Anne was the first to extend an olive branch to her father, not for his sake, but for Lucy's. She wanted to meet her half-sister, the teenager who shared their blood without knowing of their existence. "She's smart," Anne told me. After their first meeting and shy, "She seems lost in all this, as if she doesn't know where she belongs." "That's understandable," I replied. "Suddenly, she discovers she has adult siblings, that Her father had another family. It must be confusing. Luke took longer to accept the idea of meeting Lucy, but he eventually gave in. His wife, always sensible, convinced him that the girl was not to blame. She looks like Grandpa, Luke told me afterward, referring to my father. She has the same crooked smile. It was strange to hear that, but not painful as it would have been months before. It was just a fact. That girl whom I had never met carried traits of my family along with George's. As for Claire, we maintained a distant respect. Our paths rarely crossed, and when they did, usually at events related to my grandchildren where George was also present, we exchanged polite greetings and nothing more. George tried for reconciliation several times. Even after the divorce was finalized, he would show up with gifts, invite me to dinner, talk about second chances and forgiveness. With each attempt, my answer was the same. There's no going back, George. What we had is over. The most surprising thing for me was discovering that it was true. There was no going back, not because I couldn't forgive him, although it would be hard to imagine how, but because I no longer loved him. The love I felt for him for decades had died, not dramatically, but gradually, like a plant that stops receiving water and light. In its place, something unexpected grew, self-love. I learned to value my own company, to make choices based solely on what I wanted without considering someone else's preferences. I traveled alone for the first time in my life, a short Caribbean cruise I had always wanted to take, but which George always considered too expensive or pointless. Sitting on the deck watching the open sea, I felt a freedom I had never experienced. I made new friends in the photography course and the book club, people with similar interests who didn't know me just as George's wife or Anne and Luke's mother. To them, I was just Eleanor, the amateur photographer with a peculiar eye for detail, the avid reader of historical novels. And then 9 months after the divorce, something I never expected happened. I met someone. Robert was a retired history professor, a widower for 5 years. We met at the opening of a local photography exhibition where we both had works displayed. He photographed urban landscapes. I preferred to portray people. Your photos capture something special, he commented, stopping beside me as I looked at one of my images. An elderly woman selling flowers in a market, her dignity even in simple circumstances. We talked for hours that night about photography, literature, travel, music. We didn't talk about exposes or children. Those subjects came later naturally when we were already friends. Our relationship evolved slowly, organically. Coffee after photography classes, lunches, discussing books, a walk in the park on a sunny Sunday. There was no rush, no expectations, just two mature people with full and independent lives, discovering the pleasure of each other's company. The first time he kissed me was after a classical music concert, a light, almost shy kiss that made me feel like a teenager again. I laughed at that, at the idea that at 61 I could feel like a girl in love, and he laughed with me. What's so funny? He asked. Us, I replied. Two old folks acting like teenagers. Old folks, he feigned indignation. Speak for yourself. I'm in my prime, and in many ways, he was right. We were both in our prime, not of youth, certainly, but of wisdom, self-confidence, and self-knowledge. When I told Anne and Luke about Robert, their reactions were predictable. Initial concern, was he a gold digger? Was I emotionally ready? Followed by cautious support. When they finally met him at a Sunday lunch, the approval was unanimous. He looks at you like you're the most precious thing in the world, Mom, and commented later, and maybe that's what I loved most about Robert, not just how he looked at me, but how he made me feel valued, heard, seen, not as an extension of someone, but as a whole person. George found out about Robert through the children. His reaction was a mixture of disbelief and jealousy. you're already seeing someone. He asked when we met to sort out some final details about the sale of a joint property. Don't you think you're moving a little fast? Too fast? I repeated incredulously. We've been divorced for almost a year, George, and you had another family for 15. I think I'm within an acceptable time frame. He had no answer for that. As for Claire and George, I heard from Anne that they were still together, but things were complicated. Now that there was no more secret, now that he could be with her openly, it seemed that something had been lost. The forbidden fruit was no longer so tempting. That seems lost. Anne confided in me once as if he doesn't know his place anymore. I felt a pang of pity for him, an emotion that surprised me. George had built a life based on lies, and now that they had crumbled, he no longer knew who he was or what he wanted. In contrast, I had never felt so sure of my place in the world. At 61, I was discovering a new version of myself, not an alternate Eleanor, but the Eleanor who had always existed beneath the roles of wife, mother, grandmother, the Eleanor who was an artist, a photographer, a reader, a traveler, a friend, a lover. On a Sunday afternoon, a year and 2 months after the discovery that changed my life, I was at home preparing dinner. Robert was coming over later, and so were Anne and her family. Luke called to say he couldn't make it. His youngest son had a fever, but he promised to stop by the following weekend. As I chopped vegetables for the salad, I paused for a moment and looked around my redecorated apartment, the walls covered with my photographs and paintings, the table set for the people I loved. The feeling that washed over me was one of deep gratitude, not for George's betrayal. I would never be grateful for that, but for the life I discovered after it, for the strength I didn't know I had, for the new beginnings I never imagined possible. My cell phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Robert. I'm leaving the house now, he said. Do you need anything on the way? Just you, I replied, surprised by how easily the words came out. His laugh warmed my heart. I'm on my way. Then, I hung up the phone and went back to chopping vegetables, a persistent smile on my lips. I never imagined that at 61 I would be cooking for a new love, feeling that flutter in my stomach when you're waiting for someone special. The doorbell rang at precisely 6. Robert was as punctual as a Swiss watch, a characteristic I had grown to appreciate. I opened the door and there he was, green hair, perfectly cut, warm brown eyes, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite flower, for the most talented photographer in Chicago, he said, handing me the flowers. You're going to make me believe it, I replied, accepting the bouquet and standing on my toes to kiss him. Robert also brought a bottle of red wine and an old album he had found in a second-hand bookstore, from the 1950 seconds about street photography. I thought you might find some inspiration. These small gestures, noticing my interests, remembering the details, were what I loved most about him. George had rarely noticed those things in the last years of our marriage, and arrived half an hour later with her husband and their 2 children. My grandchildren ran to Robert, who greeted them with hugs and the mints he always kept in his pockets, especially for them. There was no awkwardness, no tension. It was as if he had always been part of the family. During dinner, amidst laughter and stories, I realized I had found something I never expected to have. Again, genuine happiness. It wasn't a perfect, unblemished happiness. There were still moments of pain when I remembered the betrayal. I still had occasional dreams where I found George and Claire together, but it was real. 2 days later, I received an unexpected call from Luke. Mom, you have to come to the hospital. It's Dad. My heart raced. What happened? He had a heart attack. We don't know if it's serious yet. I was silent for a moment, processing the news. Despite everything, George had been part of my life for over 4 decades, the father of my children, the grandfather of my grandchildren, I'm on my way, I finally replied. At the hospital, I found Luke in the waiting room, and arrived moments later, her eyes red and swollen. Any news? I asked. He's stable now. The doctors say it was a warning, not as bad as it could have been. We sat together, waiting for more information. That's when I saw her, Claire, rushing into the waiting room, a dark-haired teenager by her side. Lucy, I recognized her immediately, even though I had never met her before. The same eyes as George, the same face shape as my children. There was a tense moment when our eyes met. Anne stood up and went to them, briefly hugging her half-sister. Luke remained seated, uncomfortable. Claire approached me hesitantly. Eleanor, she greeted, clearly unsure how to act. Claire, I replied with a nod. Then I looked at the girl beside her. And you must be Lucy. She nodded shyly. It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am. The pleasure is mine, I replied honestly. It was a surreal situation. George's two families gathered in a hospital waiting room. In other times, it would have been unbearable. Now, though strange, it was just another chapter in this complicated story we had become. When we were finally able to see George, we went in shifts, first Anne and Luke, then Claire and Lucy. He hesitated. Should I see him? What would I say? He asked for you, and told me when she returned. I think he'd like to see you. I took a deep breath and entered the room. George was pale, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen him, connected to monitors and with an oxygen mask. Eleanor, he said, his voice weak, removing the mask momentarily. You came? Of course I came, I replied, stopping by the bed. The kids were worried. And you? He asked, his eyes searching mine. Were you worried? It was a loaded question. I thought carefully before answering. Yes, George, despite everything, I don't wish you any harm. He nodded slowly, seeming to accept my answer. You know, he said after a moment, when you're about to die, they say your life flashes before your eyes. You're not dying. I interrupted. No, not this time, he agreed, but for a moment, I thought I was. And you know what? I saw our early years together when we were young and everything seemed possible. When the kids were little and we would run around the park on Sundays, I felt a wave of nostalgia. Those were good times before the betrayal. George, don't, no, let me finish, he pleaded. I ruined everything, Eleanor, our family, our life, out of selfishness, out of weakness. And the worst part is now I have nothing, not you and not really Claire. We're together, but it's not the same, it never was. What are you saying? He sighed deeply, the song cut short by a small groan of pain. I'm saying you were right to move on, and I was wrong about everything, absolutely everything. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. I realized it was just a confession, a man looking back on his life and acknowledging his mistakes. You have Lucy, I replied softly. She needs you. Yes, he agreed, and I'm going to try to be better for her than I was for you or the kids. When I left the room, I felt as if a weight had been lifted, not completely, maybe never completely, but enough to breathe more easily. Claire was in the hallway looking out the window. I approached her, surprising myself. He's going to be okay, I said. He's too stubborn to give up now. She gave a small smile. Yes, he is. Take care of him, I added, and of Lucy. She seems like a good kid. I will, she promised, and she is a great kid. I left the hospital that day with a strange sense of closure, not forgiveness. Exactly, some things are too hard to forgive completely, but acceptance. The past was the past, it couldn't be changed, only accepted and eventually left behind. When I got home, I called Robert and told him about George's heart attack. He offered to come over immediately, but I said I needed some time alone. I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the night sky. I thought about all the twists and turns life takes, the unexpected paths we are forced to walk, Who could have imagined that the most painful discovery of my life, the decades-long betrayal by my husband, would end up leading me to a more authentic and happy version of myself? I wasn't grateful for the pain, but I was grateful for the growth that came after it, for the strength I discovered in myself, for the new possibilities that opened up when I was forced to rebuild my life from scratch. 2 months after George's health scare, I hosted a lunch at my apartment. I invited Anne and her family, Luke and his, and to everyone's surprise, I also invited Lucy, not Claire. There were limits to how much I could evolve, but the girl, that innocent young woman who shared my children's blood, deserved a chance to get to know her half siblings in a more relaxed environment. It was a surprisingly pleasant afternoon. Lucy was shy at first, but then opened up when she discovered she shared a love for music with Anne and for video games with Luke's oldest son. She's cool, my grandson Peter commented later. Can I call her auntie even though she's younger than me? You can call her whatever you like, I replied, smiling. Families come in all shapes and sizes. And ours, I realized, had found a way to expand instead of completely breaking apart. The following week, Robert surprised me with a proposal, a 3-month trip through Europe. I've always wanted to tour the museums and historical sites, he explained, and I can't think of better company than yours. 7 months. It's a long time, I hesitated, and the kids, the grandkids, they have their own lives, he argued gently, and there are video calls. Besides, you spent decades taking care of everyone. Maybe it's time to laugh a little for yourself. To my own surprise, I agreed. We booked tickets, planned itineraries, made lists of must-see places. I, who had never traveled outside the country, was about to embark on an adventure through Europe at 61. On the eve of the trip, and Luke organized a farewell dinner. Robert, of course, was there, as were the grandchildren and some close friends I had made in recent months. I toasted and proposed, raising her glass, to my mother, the strongest and bravest woman I know. To Eleanor, everyone repeated. Looking around the table at the faces I loved, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Who would have thought that at 61, after a whole life built around a marriage that turned out to be a lie, I would be here, loved, surrounded by family and friends, about to embark on an adventure? A toast, I replied, raising my own glass to second chances, and to discovering that it's never too late to start over. As everyone clapped and drank, my gaze met Robert's. His warm smile told me everything I needed to know. That this new journey, this new life I had found in the ashes of the old one was just the beginning. At the airport the next morning, I hugged my children and grandchildren with tears in my eyes. I'll be back soon, I promised. And I'll send thousands of photos. Enjoy every minute, Mom, Luke said. You deserve it. Hand in hand with Robert, I walked towards the boarding gate, my heart full of anticipation. It wasn't the future I had planned, not the life I had imagined for myself when I said I do to George over 40 years ago. It was better, truer, more mine. And as the plane took off, carrying me to unknown lands and unimaginable adventures, I realized that the greatest discovery of all had been the simplest, that I was enough on my own by myself. That my identity didn't depend on being someone's wife or someone's mother. I was just Eleanor. And finally, after 61 years, I was really starting to get to know her. Now, if you liked this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless.